I've been with Mobcraft for the last 5 years. Once we decided to build out this space, Henry called me up, an old friend of mine, and said, we're building a brewery in Milwaukee and kind of want you to help start the Wild and Sour program. We've been rocking and rolling since. From a process standpoint, it takes a lot of time. So when you're out and you're ordering a sour off the menu and you see like an $8 sour, sometimes they're well aged. They have, they spent time in an expensive barrel or an expensive warehouse. So all those things come into play. But on top of that, most sours are also either spiced or fruited, which adds a lot of cost, especially if you're using like fresh whole fruit, which I always am a big fan of. So there's like a lot of contributing factors to the cost of some of those beers, but they definitely take a lot more time than turning something out in a few weeks. Yeah, do you guys want to go check out the sour room?
Let's do it.
Cool. So this is the Wild and Sour room. This is where we make all of our barrel-aged sours as well as our stainless ferment sours. So the real difference in this room, how we process things, just like a clean beer, we're still using the brew house, which you guys saw, fermenting that beer, sometimes out there, sometimes in here. So you can see some of these tanks here. Those are generally for primary fermentation. After that, we'll usually send it to oak vessels, sometimes our large fooders, which are the bigger tanks behind me. Those generally sit between 2 months to, I think the oldest one was 3 years. So that's gonna barrel age and ferment. And the really cool thing is the microbes and bugs that are in there are going to actively be working on that beer. They're still living and still working. And that's what really creates those extra flavors in our wild and sour beers. Yeah, so you can take a handful of different paths to get to an end result of a complex beer. When you're working with mixed cultures, a relationship between bacteria and yeast that, if one's not there or the other's not there, you'll end up with just a garbage beer. But when they work in tandem, they play off each other and actually will create flavors over time, breaking down long carbohydrates, long chain sugars over years. And you can get the flavor of peach from a yeast ester being consumed by a wild yeast or something like that. So many avenues to get to really complex beer. A lot of breweries around in the US have been doing kettle soured beers. So you're still mashing in, fermenting and all that stuff, but all the bacteria is killed off and then fermented with a standard brewer's yeast strain. For me, those kind of beers kind of lack complexity because you're really killing off the microorganism that's going to help you create flavor over time. Yeah, Low Funk is kind of our answer to a kettle sour, kind of a relatively quick turnaround beer. We brew that on the clean side, ferment it with a Belgian yeast, and then acidify it with kind of a house culture. It spends probably about 6 weeks in maturation and just like acidifying. Through that process, we get a much more complex and aged beer than we would otherwise. And it's really a method to keep up with demand because it is a flagship of ours. We make it year round, and it's a great summer beer, but it still really sells well in the winter too.